Good evening, directors, staff, and members of the public joining us here and watching online. I will now call this October 4th, 2022 special meeting to order. This is the first in a series of special meetings scheduled for the first Tuesday of the month to focus on superintendent search process work. Clerkins, will you please call the roll for the record?
Director Arneson.
Here.
Director Alamin. Director Ali. Here. Director Cerrillo.
Here.
Director Ennis here. Director Jourdain.
Here.
Director Booker.
Here.
Director Caprini.
Present.
Student Representative Wesson.
Here.
Student Representative Austin. Chair Ellison.
Here. Thank you. Please let the record reflect that Director Alamin is not in attendance tonight as she had an existing conflict prior to the scheduling of this meeting. She will watch the presentation online. For our primary item tonight, I would like to introduce our guest presenter, AJ Crabell, a school board coach from the Council of Great City Schools, an association of the nation's largest urban school districts, of which MPS has been a member for many years. As an organization that has provided coaching to several districts on superintendent search processes, Mr. Crabell and the council can provide MPS with national and current context and background to help inform us as we work to develop and conduct our search process. Directors, following Mr. Crabell's presentation, we will take time for any questions and have space to discuss what we learn. Do we have him, Mr. Crabell? Hello. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Thank you for having me. Board members, it's a pleasure to be with you this evening. As always, at the council, we're happy to be of service in whatever way we can be. I've provided with you all with information prior to this meeting, and so I won't go through all that information verbatim, but instead want to preserve as much of the time this evening as a conversation so that as you have any questions or wondering what practices look like at other school systems or the types of issues that come up as school systems go through searches, I want to preserve as much time for inquiry as possible. Before, however, we open it up for that, there are a few guiding ideas that I want to share with you. The first and by far the most important thing that I want to convey is that the board should be incredibly clear about what it wants the superintendent to accomplish on behalf of children before you go out looking for one. Said differently, if you aren't clear about what you want, anybody will do. If you aren't clear about what you stand for, you can fall for any type of persuasion that candidates will offer you. And so to be crystal clear about what you want means that you want to articulate what are the exact outcomes that are the highest priority that we are creating on behalf of students. And then actually calibrate your search to seek out only candidates who have a history of producing those results for children. If they've never produced the results before, I can't recommend that you choose to let them use your district as the testing ground for the first time they'll actually produce those results. And so the more clear you can be about what are the results we want to create for children, the easier it is to then distinguish between the available candidates, know who actually has a history of being able to put points on the boards for children and who simply talks about the things that they've done. If there's nothing else that you do, nothing else you take away from our time together this evening, that is the single most important thing. Get crystal clear about what it is that you expect them to create in terms of improvements in student outcomes, and then search only for folks, accept only folks who have some type of evidence that they actually been able to put points on the boards for children in prior roles, whatever those roles might have been, wherever they might have been. So that being the number one recommendation I have for you. A few other points to walk through, all of which are included in the document that I've provided you prior to our conversation this evening. In addition to being crystal clear about what is it we want the superintendent to actually accomplish on behalf of children, in addition to that, we'd encourage you to take a exact opposite approach to your search screening process than what is often done. Frequently what people will do is they'll go out into the community and they'll ask, what do you want in the superintendent? And invariably we hear the exact same messages over and over and over across the country, large, small districts, it doesn't matter. When you go out to the community and ask, what do you want in a superintendent? You frequently get some permutation of, we want somebody who cares about children, somebody who, has a background, in education, someone who listens, someone who collaborates, someone who's an effective leader, and a variety of other things that sound really good, because who wouldn't want these things, but ultimately really come off as platitudes, and that it doesn't give you a clear understanding. How would you actually discern whether any of this is true for this candidate versus that candidate? Ultimately, these are incredibly subjective and leave you vulnerable to being wooed by folks who can wear shiny suits and speak with fancy words, but who can actually demonstrate that they've been able to get results on behalf of the children that you serve. And so this idea of going out and saying, what do you want? We just find that it often doesn't work out as well. An alternate approach, and again, the approach that we've described in the document that I've shared with you, is to instead ask the community, what would be disqualifying factors for what are specific measurables that we could apply to all of the candidates, that if these things were true, that would automatically be disqualifying. Or said differently, what would be, instead of inclusionary criteria, ask your community, what would be exclusionary criteria? What would be things that, if this is not true, then they shouldn't even be considered, or if these things are true, they shouldn't even be considered. So I'll give you a couple of examples to clarify what I mean by this. With other searches that we've supported, one example of an exclusionary criteria that came up is after the board went out and listened to its community and heard from its community about what are the exclusionary criteria you want, one that came up was, we don't think that we should consider anyone who's never been a superintendent before. So this is an exclusionary criteria. It says that anyone who has been a superintendent before is included going forward, and anyone who's not been a superintendent before is automatically excluded going forward. So that board actually heard that message very clearly. Ultimately, they did not accept that one. They accepted a different one that they heard from the community. Because what they also heard was, we want someone who's been both a classroom teacher and a principal. So this is another example of exclusionary criteria. It says anyone who hasn't had some amount of time as a classroom teacher and some amount of time as a school principal will be excluded. So while the board didn't accept the first exclusionary criteria, we want only people who have been superintendents before, they did accept the other exclusionary criteria they heard from the community. We want someone who has been a classroom teacher and a principal for. This process of saying, what are exclusionary criteria, what are the criteria we should use to identify who would not be appropriate to come and serve our children and serve our community, we find it often is a more precise way of hearing the vision that the community has for what would be acceptable and not acceptable in a superintendent, and makes it a little bit harder for the board to be easily persuaded, by folks who can present really well in an interview, but don't necessarily have the characteristics that the community would find acceptable in its next superintendent. Finally, in addition to being clear about what are the results that you want for children and to actively screen for those, in addition to going out to your community and aggressively engaging in dialogue to glean from your community, what are the things that would be disqualifying? What are the exclusionary criteria? If these things are true, or if these things aren't true, that this person just wouldn't be right for us. So in addition to those things, finally, what we'd recommend is that while you are certainly confined by the legal frameworks of your state, which, to be fair, are a little bit different than most states we work with. So I understand that there are unique capacities that you all have to sort through. But while you're working through those, I'd be trying to find a search process that protected the anonymity of candidates for the longest period of time possible. And the reason for this is because the more exposure that candidates have when they're not yet really a finalist, when they're not fully being considered, the less likely it is that you'll have high quality candidates who probably are in another position right now, already have a job. The less likely it is that they are to come forward and apply. And so if you can design your process, again, consistent with state statute, which I understand has some very specific restrictions in terms of the finalist, but the more confidential you can keep the search up until that point where you interact with state requirements, the greater the likelihood that you will attract a larger set of candidates, a higher quality set of candidates, because they won't have to put their job at stake just to be considered. They'd only have to then have their job in a compromised position once they're actually a finalist. And so those are three things I want to lift up. Again, all of this is reflected in the document I shared. So at this point, I just want to open the floor and be responsive to whatever inquiries you have. I've also shared with your staff, and they'll be able to share with you, some comparable salaries for other districts in the council that are of a similar size and demography as yours. The short version of the story is you are at the bottom of the pay scale for comparably sized districts, but you'll see that when you look at the list of districts that we've pulled together. Again, these are just other districts in the council, so it's not other districts, not a lot of other districts in your state or your region or things of that nature, but just demographically similar districts across the council. So these are large, medium-sized urban school systems across the country that are similar to you all. And when you look at them, you'll see fairly easily that the salary for those, you all are at the lower end of that scale. Now, that doesn't include what is a really hard to compare apples to apples analysis of the various additional parts of the compensation package, such as insurance and annuities and things of that nature. And so you'll have to do more analysis to try to identify what that looks like, but it's really hard to be apples to apples at that point because things are so different from state to state. But on a salary basis, of the 6 school systems I believe we pulled, there was one who had a salary lower than yours, and the remainder had a salary that was higher than yours. So with that information, let me just stop here and open the floor. What questions do you have? How can I be of service?
Thank you, Mr. Graybill. Directors, please hit your request to speak button if you have any questions, comments, anything you want to discuss. It's behind the, yes. So, Director Caprini.
Hello. Yes, I'm on. So when you mentioned the pay rate and us being the lowest, well, the second lowest in the country, would that have anything to do with the cost of living across the country? Because I know that there are states that have a much lower cost of living and perhaps could afford to pay a superintendent more money, or vice versa.
So I certainly wouldn't represent you as being the second lowest across the country.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, take that back. Oh, wait. Never mind. Don't take it back.
Just among the 6, your district plus the 5 other comparison districts that I shared with your staff. And again, those are just other districts in the council that are demographically similar to yours.
With those
being
6, then.
similar doesn't guarantee that they have a similar cost of living. You can certainly pull that data yourself. I will tell you that generally speaking, our school systems that have a lot in common demographically, more often than not, tend to have quite a bit in common in terms of cost of living. So for example, most of the ones that are very similar to you are more centrally situated in the country rather than on the coast, where the cost of living variances are much more significant. But yes, that's information that you easily pull, and if you wind up hiring some type of search consultant, they could do that. But realistically, this is something that your staff is more than competent to pull up, or that if it's something really important to you and it's time of the factor, we could pull that for you as well.
Well, it could be very important to the staff. I don't know, but I was just curious. And thank you for the clarification on choosing the 6 schools so I can correct myself. And it's not across the country. You chose 6 schools, and that's the information. So I appreciate the correction. Thank you. If I come up with something else, I'll chime in.
Thank you. Director Booker.
Thanks a lot, Chair Ellison. Thank you for giving us various examples. Really appreciate that. Salary is awesome. I was just wondering, is there a sweet spot for like experience? I could definitely understand, like teaching, being a principal, and things like that. But just overall years of experience is where I'm going with. Have you seen some type of information that says this is the sweet spot?
No, I've not. I've seen highly effective superintendents in their first year, and I've seen highly ineffective superintendents in their 20th year.
Perfect. Thank you.
Director Ali?
Thank you very much for giving us presentation. My question is that this district, we're looking for, I'm put it this way, we're not doing academically great here, and I want to hear from you how to attract a superintendent with a good track record of academically proven leader. If you can give us some input on that, I highly appreciate it.
So I just want to make sure that I'm clear on this. I think you said we are not doing academically great, or did you say we are doing academically great?
We are not doing great.
Okay, good, because I looked at some of your performance data, and I would not describe your performance as academically. But that's really important that this is something that you're focused on. But this goes back to my first point. You all are going to need to identify, because there are many different areas of performance. You all are going to need to identify, of all these areas of performance for students, which ones are the highest priority, because only then will you be able to tailor your search process to try to identify who has a track record of helping bolster student success in these specific areas. So for example, let's say you decided the single most important thing is that all of your students needed to grow up to be biologists. I'm just making something up. So you all decided that the single most important thing is all of our children need to be rock stars in biology. That is the industry here in our region. If they aren't biologists, they're just not going to be set up well to be successful, in Minneapolis. If you all made that decision, then you identify how do we measure whether or not our students are good at biology. So you all would eventually identify whatever way it is of saying, here's how we know that students are good at biology or not. You'd identify where are we at right now and where do we want to get our students being good at this. And once you know that, then what you would do is you would go out and you would hunt for, where can I find an educational leader who's had students start off where we are at in biological know-how and has managed over time to get them to where we want to go. But none of that works if you all haven't first gotten incredibly clear about what are the few areas that are most important. And when I say few, I generally recommend no fewer than one, no more than 5 areas of student learning that you say are the priority, and the fewer the better. Really, 1, 2, or 3 is fine. But that's something you all need to determine. Now, in determining that, I'd recommend that be a confluence of what you just described, student performance data, but also some amount of listening to your community to make sure that the work the board is doing is effectively representing the vision and value of the community. But once you've done that, you've identified these 1, 2, or 3, here are these absolutely critical areas of academic success that we need to see our students grow in, then yes, we could support you, or I'm sure whatever search firm or law firm that you choose to work with, however you get supported in search, can then help screen applicants to identify. Well, first design the application to actually ask for that information, and then screen applications based on what performance folks are able to demonstrate that they've been able to get in that particular domain in their previous areas of employment. So that process starts with the question that you asked, which is how do we know whether or not someone's going to be effective at addressing some of our educational needs. The way you'll know that is you first, as a board, before you go out and even before you put on an application, ideally, but certainly before you start screening applicants, is you need to be clear about what does that look like to us? What are the 1, 2, 3 specific areas of student learning that we need our next superintendent to be great at. And then let's design the application so that it pulls for that information. And let's design the screening process such that we exclude applicants who don't have a demonstrated history of capacity in the areas that the community finds most important.
Okay, Director Ali? Yeah, okay. Any other questions, comments? Or this is our chance. Director Arneson?
Hello and welcome. Your picture's gone away. I feel odd. I'm sure you're still here. I just feel odd talking to the air. So, all right. Well, I trust that you're. Oh, there you are. Thank you. Sorry, your picture went away there, and it just felt odd for a second. I was wondering if you could tell you. Thanks so much for this discussion. I've been a part of a search just once before. Just once, and I know you've done, which felt like a lot, but I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about search firms. And you reference it, you have, your document is great, and you talk a little bit about the importance of not using your HR firm, which I agree with, and I appreciate that you laid out kind of the challenge of trying to kind of place current staff in that position. But also I know that kind of getting to select kind of the right fit for a search firm, if we choose to, if you use a search firm, if that's what we choose to do, can be challenging. And I know in my one experience, frankly, that didn't go particularly well for a lot of reasons. So I was wondering if you could just maybe talk a little bit about maybe some tips you've seen, maybe some other school districts. And I know that and maybe you can comment as well, as kind of who typically makes up a search firm. I mean, in my experience, there's a wide range. There's kind of executive, kind of professionals who look for executives, then there's kind of former superintendents who have a list of their friends. So maybe you could kind of talk a little bit, would you mind expanding upon that topic a little bit?
So the document we shared, we try to make clear that what we believe is that boards should first have a very clear understanding of what it is that you want, and that you should attain that in part by going out and listening to your community. What often happens, and what I would consider a mistake, is that instead of the board going out and listening for the vision and values of its community, in situations like this, the board will outsource that to, frankly, outsiders, folks who are not the board, often folks who are not even from your region. I think this is a mistake. As elected officials, we represent the vision and values of our community. It's on us to be in touch with and connect with our community, and on us to be doing that listening. Our recommendation is you go do your listening yourself. And so I would not encourage you to hire anyone, search firm, law firm, any firm, to go out and do listening on your behalf. Instead, what I'd recommend is you design the process, and certainly we could support you in that, but design the process by which you go out and conduct listening to get a sense of what is it the community is looking for in terms of a focus on student performance, as well as what are the community not looking for in terms of the exclusionary criteria. Most of the time, your search firms will offer to do all of this listening for you. But much of the time, we find that they come back with documents that basically seem interchangeable from community to community, that often don't sound all that differentiated, largely because folks are asking some of the exact same questions, but that don't get at the nuance of what is unique and special about a particular community. And so instead of starting with a search firm, start with conversations with your community. Then once you have clarity about what you want and don't want, then make the decision about what support do we need to actually execute the search. And for that, you could use a search firm. They do a great job of managing the paperwork for search, so receiving the applications and sorting them for you. You could use a law firm, an external law firm, not any of your own internal in-house attorneys, and probably not the law firm that you most regularly use, a separate law firm. Many law firms will provide the service as well, where they can run the paperwork associated with the search for you. So they'll post the position and receive all the applications and sort them for you. And those are features that either an external law firm or a search firm can provide that we think are really very incredibly valuable services that the board will need to rely on someone for. What you absolutely don't want to do is you don't want to rely on your own staff for really anything that you can avoid, just because it's not fair to put them in that position. It can be a really awkward position of running the paperwork for your own, soon-to-be supervisor. And so, to avoid putting your staff in an unfair, awkward situation, just use external supports for these things. Definitely should not be your in-house HR that's receiving the applications. It should be whoever your external partner is. Again, whether external law firm or external search firm, whichever of those makes the most sense for you. At that point, it makes good sense to go out and select them. But I wouldn't recommend bringing them in any earlier than that in the process. I'd recommend first you do your own community engagement, and then pick whatever search firm or law firm you feel like best will be able to support your needs in terms of the paperwork of the search. As a benefit, it'll also save you a lot of money. A lot of the fees that these various firms will charge you is often associated with an extensive amount of community engagement. This makes sense. Community engagement, if done by external parties, can be a really expensive endeavor. But you all doing it yourself, not only do I believe you'll wind up with better quality data, better understanding of the vision and values of the community, but you'll also save yourselves a fair amount of money that can then, preferably instead of being poured into a superintendent search, can be poured into classrooms. And so, again, all of this is laid out in the document I shared, and so it goes into it a little bit more depth. But as you all have more questions about this, I'm happy to go over that. To the point that you made near the tail end of your question, yes, so certainly it's a case that most of the folks that I've experienced doing these searches are either former superintendents or former board members. I actually find that to be helpful. They have some sense of the industry that we're in. They understand schools, they understand the language of schools, and so I find that to be helpful. Often the law firms that will manage the paperwork of a search for you have a strong education law practice, and so they tend to understand these things as well, and it can be a great ally. I actually find that a value add. I think it's a little bit more difficult if you're looking at just traditional headhunting firms that don't have a strong education practice. They will probably do a better job of bringing you non-traditional candidates. And so if that's something you're interested in, then you probably will lean that way. If you're leaning toward traditional candidates, then it probably makes more sense to lean toward a law firm or a search firm that specializes in education. They'll have larger networks and have a better understanding of that space.
Thank you. Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you for detailing kind of the whole process. I think it's, I agree. My memory of our kind of search last time is we actually did go out and during that listening phase, but it was helpful also to have somebody who could kind of be kind of providing that support with taking notes, collating, right, gathering, making sure that we captured, if you're having that support and helping us to organize and kind of sign up, that sort of thing. I was thinking about the latter part after the listening part and looking kind of at your point where you're talking about trying to screen out 50 to 80% of the candidates, right? And in Minnesota, you alluded to the laws and the statute here, right? And so I know once an application if an application were to be received by our board members, then they would become public. So that goes back to your earlier point of probably not wanting to make public literally everybody who expresses interest in our position. So we did use a firm to help us match that rubric, right? Develop that rubric, and then developing a process. We need to continue to develop a process of how you keep narrowing that field down until you get to whatever number we feel comfortable with. But to your point, whatever that number is, they will be public in Minnesota. And I know that's not the case in other states. I know other states you have the freedom to, you have different laws, but that's not the case here. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments?
I have one more.
All right. I had
Chair Ellison, pardon me.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Just want to clarify the law in Minnesota as to when it becomes public. So obviously, if you're meeting as a whole board, anything you discuss there, like if you were to take applications, that would be public because you're discussing it among an actual board meeting. But if you utilize a process similar to we had the last time, applicants don't become public, their names don't become public until they're selected for an interview by you as a board. So last time we had a selection committee that had less than a majority number of board members in that selection committee. That wasn't a meeting of the board, so that process could go forward. It's when the applicant is selected for an interview before you as a board as a whole, then that becomes public.
Yeah, and this is part of why, in particular, for you all in your legislative framework, I strongly recommend a very aggressive approach to screening out candidates by using exclusionary criteria derived from community listening sessions. Because the ideal scenario for you will be to eliminate 70 to 80% of candidates before you even contemplate looking at resumes or anything of that nature. That you are so clear about exactly what you want that you can identify that the vast majority of these folks actually don't meet what's right for our community. If you are in the position where there are 20 candidates in front of you and you're like, well, any of these people will do, I would consider that a red flag, a flag that you have not sufficiently done the work to make sure that you understand the vision and values of your community. If all the candidates look alike to you, then that's an indication you've got homework to do. And I would encourage you to stop doing a superintendent search and start doing community listening and really try to codify what are the screening criteria that we'll use to avoid having the board look at anyone who doesn't meet a really baseline set of criteria. And so again, any screening system that doesn't eliminate 50, 60, 70, preferably 70 or 80% of applicants, I would worry that it simply isn't rigorous enough and that it's a reflection of the board not having adequately done its homework to make sure that the screening criteria eliminated folks who were never going to be appropriate for your community in the first place.
Dr. Anderson?
Thanks. I had a follow-up. Thank you, Ms. Moore, for that information. I think, though, also what so we can, it's good to know, we can receive the applications, we can see them as board members. However, if we didn't hire, like, if once we met, if we wanted to, we couldn't, how should I say this? If we as a board would decide, if we tried to do a do-it-yourself model entirely, like the moment we met as a board to figure out who we wanted to interview among the screening process, then those names would become public, right? So we would need to, so essentially we as individuals can get a list of 80 people, but we would have no way as a board to meet and like come to some common terms of which of those, which of the 50% of the 80 we would eliminate without making all 80 names public, which is the kind of the conundrum that we're in. So we can see the names, but can't meet as a group to discuss all the names.
Which is why I'm recommending a process by which you, before you ever accept a single application, have already identified the screening tools and the exclusionary criteria so that if you get 80 applicants, that 65 of them never even make it to you for consideration, that they just simply don't meet the minimum threshold of your expectations for a candidate. And so instead of surfing through 80 applications looking for who sounds good on paper, spend your time just looking at the very, very, very small percentage of candidates who actually have a chance of being a quality fit for you all. And so I understand this is not the way things are normally done, and boards seem to like sifting through 50 applicants, thinking that you will have some magical capacity to ascertain your community's vision without some type of rubric. You won't. This is a process that will lead to failure. Instead, what you want is you want to be as clear as possible on the front end and design an application process so that you can screen out all of those folks So
Yeah.
you don't even spend any time on them. So by the time it does come to the full board for deliberation, not only have you had a community committee that's helped you with the screening, but the board as a whole did in fact conduct the screening itself. You just conducted it proactively through exclusionary criteria rather than at the end of the process when you actually had applications in hand.
Yes, yeah, just to be clear, I 100% agree, and I hear you on the rubric piece. Just talking through out loud that there is a piece between the you and the screening of the rubric. That's somebody and something that this board will need to kind of consider how they do that. And it could be, if the clearer the rubric, the easier that process will be for whomever that you is, but it won't be 9 of us unless we want the names to be public, is kind of the point I was trying to make. And then I have one quick question. If you happen to know how many schools in the council, how many districts in the Council of Great City Schools right now have interim superintendents or are doing a search right now?
So I don't know that off the top of my head. What I do know is of the, I believe we're currently at 78 member districts in the council. I think 20 of those have the same superintendent they did today as in 2020.
Yeah. So you said 20 of the 70 have the same superintendent from 20. Yeah, so presumably 50 either just got a new superintendent or are somewhere in the process.
Of the 78, so 58.
58.
Yeah, it is a extraordinary time, and that we have seen many board members resign, as well as many superintendents resign, and so it is a challenging marketplace, and that's not just council districts. That's really all districts across the country. The number of superintendent departures and the number of board member resignations is higher, or was higher last year and the first half of this year than I recall seeing in the last 20.
Yeah. So it's an important context, I guess, to remember as you kind of discussed pay earlier, and we're discussing the competitive marketplace and just this overall, the overall turnover rate.
Superintendent right now, that is correct.
Yeah, we are not by ourselves looking for a superintendent for sure. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Seeing no one else in the queue, I had one. Okay, honestly, Mr. Crable, when I announced that we were going to start the superintendent search, I said the district was going to put out a request for proposals to hire someone to help us do community engagement. I've heard you say several times that that's a board job. Can you speak a little bit more to that? What does that look like? What kind of planning do we need to do? How many meetings should we be having?
So when we've worked with other districts around community engagement, or other boards rather, around community engagement work, it varies based on the reason for community engagement. Are we doing this because we're setting goals at the beginning of a 5-year goals at the beginning of the strategic planning period? Or are we doing this because we're about to embark on superintendent search? So the rationale for the board going out and doing the listening can vary. But what we typically hold to is that whenever it's time, whenever the board needs community voice for board work, which is different from when the superintendent needs community voice for superintendent work. And so if the superintendent, if there's decisions about what principal should be at a school, I don't consider that board work. I consider that superintendent work. But I would generally expect the superintendent or someone on staff to be doing some type of community engagement around that. But that's community engagement around staff work. That's not the sort of thing I'm talking about. So when we've been supporting boards on community engagement around board work, which again, the 2 most common examples of that are superintendent search and 5-year goal setting in advance of a new strategic plan, that in those circumstances, yes, we strongly recommend that the board does its own listening, that the board has a responsibility for representing the vision and values of the community. And so we would strongly urge the board, in your case, the 9 of you, to design a process. If you wanted our help, we'd certainly help you design a process, but of course, you'd still need to execute the process of going out and conducting the listening. The way that we frequently organized that in the past is what we've done one-on-one meetings with board members to get a sense of who all do you need to listen to, and then help pull together one complete list of all of the listening that all the board members collectively think is important, and then have a facilitated conversation with the board as a whole around, okay, here are all of the communities that you all collectively feel should be heard. Here are all the organizations that you feel should be outreach to. And then as a board, just sit down and design what all listening are you going to do and where. Now, one of the ground rules of this listening is board members never go anywhere alone. This is board listening. This is not board member campaigning. Board members left to their own devices, solo out in the community, frequently descend into campaigning mode and are no longer carrying a message on behalf of the community. They're carrying a message on behalf of themselves. And so really what we recommend is when you're doing this, this needs to be board work, not board member work. And so once you've determined we want to go out and conduct these listening sessions in these places, then the next step would be that board members would sign up to identify who are the 2 or 3 or 4 board members who will go and conduct that session. In that manner, you make sure that all of the board members do listening in all the parts of town. We think it's a huge mistake to only do listening in your own part of town. In fact, we'd encourage people, if you're going to do 5 listenings, maybe do 1 of them in your part of town and do the other 4 somewhere else. And expect your colleagues to do the same so that they aren't doing all the listening in their part of town. Like, you want the people in your part of town, you want their voice to be heard across the entire district. You don't want you to be the only person who's heard the voice of a community. You really want people to have a chance to have the voice heard across as many of the 9 of you as possible. And so you go out in groups of 2, 3, or 4, you do the listening, and then you bring that information back. And what often happens is boards call on us to then analyze that listening and offer an analysis of what are the most frequently cited topics, what are the what's a thematic analysis of it, with what frequency do which themes come up. And then you use that for your decision making, whether, again, for goal setting, for strategic planning purposes, or for superintendent evaluation, or superintendent selection, rather. And so that's generally how the process looks. It starts with asking the board, what should the listening look like? Then transitions to the board members signing up to go out and do the work. The board members going out and doing the listening on a script, by the way. It's not board members just randomly doing their own thing. Again, this is not board members doing the listening. It's the board doing the listening. And so we'd support you in developing a script, and then everyone would use the script. The last thing you'd ever want in one of these situations is this side of town heard this message, but that side of town, they heard the better message. That's a bad plan. But what you really want is everybody across every part of town to get the same message. Everybody should have the same access to the same voice being able to be heard. The way you do that is you put everybody on a script so that the same message goes out, the same questions get asked, and then you get the information back that's actually apples to apples at that point. And then you use that, an analysis of it, which again, we can provide the analysis, or certainly other parties that could. Then you use that to identify, okay, what are the screens that we'll use to disqualify candidates who would not be an appropriate fit for our community. And so that's what the process looks like as we've helped guide it. Again, part of this assumes that the board is actually willing to go out and do the work. So that's something that you all have to determine. I don't know that I've met all of you in person. I've met several of you. You don't seem like lazy elected officials. You seem like the type of folks who are willing to take it to the streets and talk to your community and make sure that they are heard by their elected officials. If that's the case, that's what I would recommend you do, is actually go out and do the listening. So is it completely a non-starter to outsource the listening to your community to someone else? No, I don't think that's a non-starter. If that's what you want to do it. I would just tell you, we think that's suboptimal. We think that there should be as few barriers between the community's voice and the community's representatives as possible. And that includes then going out and doing listening.
Okay, so excuse me, thank you. Engagement consultant kind of makes sense, or, you know, to help us set up the engagement, to help us with the logistical details, just hire someone to do the logistics, maybe not the engagement necessarily, but the logistics.
Absolutely.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, and again, because this is a superintendent search, I'm sorry, I want to make sure that point that you just made is clear. Because it's a superintendent search, yes, I generally recommend you avoid using district staff wherever possible. And so if you need logistical support, now I've had some boards, they've handled logistics themselves, where they've gone out with 4 board members, and one of the board members is always taking notes while the other one's, talking, and they'll switch off halfway through the script, and the board member who is taking notes, now they're doing talking, and the board member who is talking is now taking notes. So I've actually seen boards do this entirely themselves without having logistical support. But if that's not you, if you feel like you're going to need logistical support, then yes, for this particular task, I'd encourage you to get that external from the district than to, again, put district staff in the awkward position of being the logistical support for the search.
Yeah, I think we hear you loud and clear. Don't use current staff to do this board work. That's what I'm hearing. Board members, any other questions? Great. Student Representative Wesson?
Hi, thank you for your presentation. This has been very helpful. I kind of want to go into more specifics about like Chair Ellison's question in regards to students. One thing, the biggest thing I'm concerned about during this process is how specifically students will be engaged. And I know that the Council of Great City Schools has represented, or other school districts with like student board representatives are on the board, and they go to the Council of Great City Schools. So do you have any experience, or have you ever seen anything of how specifically boards use get student perspective into the search? Because I know it can kind of be hard to have just specifically target students. So have you seen anything or have any experience in regards to that?
Yes, and so this varies pretty significantly by school board. You have some school boards where there's a student rep who's sitting where you're sitting, which it looks like you're sitting right next to one of your colleague board members. You have other school boards where the student reps are kind of sitting off at the end of the dais, kind of in a section by themselves, and even other school districts where either they're out in the audience or they don't even have the student rep. And so because you see a wide variety of norms around having a student rep support and serve the board with the board, it stands to reason that you're going to see a wide variety of practices around inclusion of student voice. And so instead of going through all the different permutations that I've seen, generally what I'd recommend is if you have student representatives on the board, then whenever the board is doing work around the superintendent search, I would encourage student board members to be included in that same work. Now, there are some states where student representatives are not allowed to go into closed session, and so if that's a restriction in your state, then so be it. But there are other states where student representatives are allowed in closed session without it being considered a violation of privilege. And so in those cases, we'd encourage a board, if your normal practice is to have the students involved in closed session for other issues, then it makes sense to have them involved in closed session for the superintendent search as well. But at minimum, if board members are going out and doing listening to the broader community, it makes sense that student reps would be participating in that, and specifically would certainly be participating in any listenings that are explicitly targeted at members of the student body. The other thing that I've seen commonly that I think is a good practice is if there's some district-wide student council, so some districts, every high school will have a representative on a body that ultimately advises the superintendent or something of that nature. Then making sure that you set aside time to listen to that group is important. We've got another district that just finished up a superintendent search, and there's student district-wide student advisory group participating in that. They had their own private listening session with board members to get a sense of what their expectations were on the search. And now I've got another board that's going through a strategic planning process, and the student representative on that board are actually leading the sessions for the district-wide student council. They call it the district advisory committee, I think, the student advisory committee. But the student board reps are actually leading the listening for that group as it relates to the strategic planning. So I've seen this often. Strongly recommend, very strongly recommend that in whatever ways your law allows for student board reps to be involved, or for student advisory council, at minimum to deploy those as a way of having an opportunity to hear from student voice and have it included in the larger collection of community listening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director Surreal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation. This is really more of a comment than a
If
question.
someone is speaking, I can't hear them.
Okay, the mic is out. So there you go. Okay, thank you for the presentation. And this is not really a question for you, but just a reflection for me, being the first time that I'm part of this. I'm really looking forward to ensuring that we do have equitable representation in the voices that we bring to the table, and ensuring that the immigrant voices are also represented. I do have a question in regards to anything prohibiting engaging and having representation from the Teachers Federation on this issue. And this will be a question to our council.
So the question was.
The question,
Go ahead.
the question is that you're wondering, is there anything that prohibits our unions from being involved? And there isn't necessarily anything. And I would say that during the last search, there were members of various organizations, including MFT, who were part of the selection committee.
Thank you, I appreciate it. As I mentioned, this is the first time that I'm part of this, so I want to ensure that I do understand correctly the process of it. We have a lot of work ahead of us, and really excited and looking forward to it. Thank you.
Director Caprini.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Student Representative Wesson, for your question. I was thinking along the same lines, and I thought I'm just going to be still, and I bet he's going to ask the question. But I'd like to offer a suggestion. I know that you mentioned our schools having student councils, and during the day, there are opportunities for students to actually go to, I don't know whatever the student council has a space, or it could be a Boys and Girls Club that has space or somewhere where they can actually engage in this conversation if there's something set up and they know ahead of time, just so that we don't have this expectation that students are going to miss out on after-school activities so that they can rush to an event where they're going to be able to have their voices heard. I think it's really important that we navigate this in a way where we are indulging them in the buildings that they're in during the day when they have time. And it's not getting in the way of obviously their studies or what have you. So I just wanted to make sure that that was something that we do or they consider, or I guess we consider. And I realize that there are board directors that do have full-time jobs, and perhaps some of us who have some flexibility would be able to participate on certain days in those specific schools that are having those opportunities, because that's a rich environment to have an opportunity to have a student in front of you for about 30 minutes if you're asking them questions and they're giving back feedback. It just eliminates that whole having to miss practice or band or whatever the case may be. I just wanted to add that. So this has been a great conversation, and I think what we're doing here is laying a really great foundation for the new board. And I think I can speak for all of us that this is an opportunity to set those folks up for success. Because I do recall the last search being very difficult. And last thing I want to say is, if you can give us, or maybe me, any guidance on how to encourage and also have conversations outside of all of this with community that pushes in so hard that it makes it difficult for some folks to be courageous in their choices that they're making, because Minneapolis is a very special place, and I just hope that there's a formula of some sort that you could share with us about making sure that we keep our eye on the prize and not get distracted by the noise.
Yeah,
Thank you.
So a few best practices that I think will serve you well in that regard. One, be really clear up front, and I've said this repeatedly, but because it bears repeating, be really clear up front about what it is that you're wanting in a superintendent. And the way you get there is you make it clear for the community what information you're asking of them before you ask it. So ideally, if you're going to do a listening with a particular community on a Thursday, ideally they've had at least 7 to 10 days to consider the questions that you're going to be asking them when you engage in the listening. So you really don't want to surprise people. So for example, if you're going to ask folks, what are measurable criteria that should exclude people from consideration? You don't want to ask that on Thursday. You want to have asked that 7 to 10 days in advance, and then you get the answers on Thursday that emerge in the conversation when you're going through the script with them. Next, once you have all that information, you need to provide 2 forms of that information back to people. One, you need to provide them a complete and largely unedited account of everything that you've heard from everywhere that you've heard it. So this document, I think of it as the raw feedback. Will often, in some cases, be 60, 80, 90, 100 pages long. And this is just literally word for word. This is exactly what we've heard. We didn't edit it. We didn't modify it. Usually people will modify it for school appropriate language, but I've even seen some boards who left all of the colorful things in it just because they wanted to demonstrate an abundance of transparency about what they heard. So there's 2 documents you're going to present back. One is just that huge raw document that's largely unedited. But a second document you want to report back to folks is, here is how we used what we heard. And often school boards will do neither of these. You want to give back the raw so that people can look for themselves and come to their own assessment of how much fidelity there was between what the board did and what the board heard. But you want that second document because you want people to know how you used what they shared with you. And the more that people have a sense that you actually took what they said and you put it into practice, the more willing people will be in the future to actually communicate with you. And so these are just a few things that I'd recommend, that whatever your process be and whoever is guiding the process, that you give people ample time with the questions up front so that they can have time to think through and really kind of even confer with their neighbors on and what is the answer to this question? What do we want? But that they're not put on the spot and left kind of fumbling around trying to find answers to something. Give them that, set them up for success in that regard. And then on the back end of the listening, give them back a full copy of the largely unredacted things that you've heard from across the entire community, as well as the document. It's usually just a 1 to 3 page document that says, and here's what we heard and how we used it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Crable. Seeing nobody else in the queue, I am going to thank you for your words tonight and let you go. Board members, I'm not letting you go yet. I think we need to do a little bit more talking about our next steps. So thank you. We'll see you soon. So board members, any comments? Anything you're seeing? Anything? Student Representative Wesson?
Thank you. I just want to go off what Director Caprini said. Thank you for bringing that up. That was really, I think that's one of the main things that, we kind of need to focus on this board, meeting with student groups, getting in schools, talking to students. I believe it's a very, talking with like parents and caregivers and adults is more, I don't want to say easy, but more of like a streamlined process than just talking with students. In my experience, students have a lot to say. They want to be involved in the process, but they don't really know how to be. And so having board members, district staff, even the intern superintendent possibly coming into schools and talking with students about this process would be very beneficial. One of the examples with Director Cirillo, she came to one of our Washburn Student Councils meetings and talked with the students, and I heard like really great feedback about that, so thank you for doing that. It was very beneficial, and it made students feel like the board was listening, and it's something that I really think we should build upon and look into as we continue this process. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Ali.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Chair. I think the question was very, my take is that we have to exactly know what we want. And there are so many things we want, but certainly we have to choose what's more important for us. And in my opinion, academic is the cornerstone for what we are the leader we are looking for. And also the other things that I can add is that the ELL challenges, opportunities, or in other words, ELL students, academics of ELL, that's specifically ELL students, also there's high need. I also see that our special education also. So those things can be a characteristics of a leader we want. This school district wants. This school district wants a leader that can help students to perform academically well. As you know, the majority of our kids are not proficient academically. That's sad reality. You know, they're not doing great in math and reading, particularly the students of color. You know, and I think that's we have to specifically say we want a leader with this, and then move on. But if we just say we need a superintendent, we don't need a superintendent. We need a superintendent who can help us to move forward where we are now. So that's my take. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Arneson?
Thank you, my friend.
Thanks. That's a great segue. I have a similar sort of comment. I think we're, at least I could be wrong, but I didn't hear any objection. I think we have a clear, just thinking about implementing the suggestions, the good suggestions that we had here, right? So what I'm hearing, similar to Director Ali, is that we want to figure out a way that we can meet as a board and develop sort of a list of priorities of skill sets of what we want, at least initially, and the exclusionary information that Mr. Crabell was talking about, that will help us prepare as we go out into the community. We can then double check, we can hear back, and we want to develop some questions around that. So what I'm wondering, what I'm thinking might make sense is between now and I know we have time on the calendar again, the first Tuesday of the month. So, and we have an RFP out, which really, we talked about needing some logistical help. I think it would be really helpful if board members between now and that meeting in November were able to tell you, Chair, or our staff, Ryan, if you imagine yourself having capacity. And I just note as well that our community engagement and this process is going to straddle two boards, which is extra complicated. So there are some people will be here for the entire process, and some people will not be here for the entire process. So I think it would be helpful if individuals thought about their own capacity about and gave feedback to you between now and November about the ability to take notes, the ability to compile the giant stack of raw data, as he mentioned, right? Is that something that you have skills to do, or do we want to hire somebody to help us collect that feedback, be taking the notes? So I think that's really concrete information that we need in order to make a decision about how we're going to go about collecting engagement, right? And again, what I heard Mr. Crabell say is there's different ways you can do it. Boards can do it entirely themselves, or we can go with a script and do listening, but have logistical support. So I think that's question number one between now and November for board members. And second, I think it would behoove the chair maybe to spend some time looking just at some about our calendar and our agenda to figure out how we can have a conversation on the calendar about kind of narrowing down in to what we're looking for and collecting that preliminary information, which is similar to what Director Ali just said. And that might be a way we can move forward.
I mean, in addition to that information, we also need communities. I've heard the immigrants, I heard the students, I heard ELL. What communities do we want to make sure we're hearing from? And then being able to set up those meetings. Director Caprini?
Well, I don't need to email Ryan or Jennifer or Council or you to tell you that I do have an expectation that we will have logistical support.
Okay.
Because this is such a big deal that we're doing on the front end, it's incredibly important that we have the support we need to make sure that we are getting the raw data so that going forward, there isn't a, well, I guess I misspelled that, or it's too much. It's too much, and we just need that extra support. So I am in complete support of looking into finding a group to help us do that logistical piece, and committed to being flexible in my day so that I'm able to move about the city to be able to be a part of those conversations. Because people know who we are, and regardless of how they feel about an individual, I would hope people would look at this as a board director participating in the conversation and not an individual who is there as Mr. Claiborne? You're right, campaigning, because that's not the case. This isn't about any of that stuff. So support and flexibility, I'm absolutely giving myself into this work to make sure that it gets where it needs to be. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Soria?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question will be, how are we engaging with the parent advisory councils that we do have already within the district? Because their voices are crucial to
Director
this.
Arneson?
I just don't want to miss that opportunity of ensuring that we are listening to, especially parents that I know that have been leading the councils for over 10 years. So that is something that is really important, and especially that all these councils are councils of color. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Arneson?
If I just would respond that I would, at least in my mind, I would imagine we would include, that's all the more reason we want to make sure we have a meeting, whether it's with someone who is providing some logistical support, writing it down, but we want to develop a comprehensive list that we all contribute to as a board, and I would imagine that we would want to include those parent groups as well. And we wouldn't, that's why we need to make sure we have the proper time on our calendar to address the points, I think, similar to what Director Ali has mentioned, so we know clearly what we're asking, what information we're trying to collect from our communities, and then spending time really thoughtfully thinking, making a comprehensive list of who we want to do. And I do remember doing that in the last process as well, and then I think that's what Mr. Claybill was talking about, referencing as well. You have a comprehensive list, and then you logistically are signing up and making sure that we're getting them all covered.
2, 3, 4 board members, each one. So in addition to a list, we need to come up with the questions. So again, if you have questions, why don't you send them me, Ryan, Director Arneson? Go ahead. Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Okay, I think it's fine if people want to send you questions, but I would also imagine, rather than sending them in advance, that we would have maybe you think about it, and then we'd schedule a discussion on the calendar, and maybe you bring your questions. Oh, okay.
Thank you. Director Jordan?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Ellison. I would follow also his advice on having a script that we go out to the community as well. And also, too, go out to different parts of the city as well. I mean, and then listen to a totally different a base of parents and community folks that otherwise wouldn't necessarily be heard. And we have our parent groups, we have other parents who are involved, but they're not involved in a specific demographic. They're not involved in SEEK, they're not involved in APAC, they're not, but they're involved parents, whether it's just a PTA or it's just, a crossing guard or whatever. They're still involved, they still have a voice, and maybe they don't know where to fit in, and that's where we would come out and go out to the public and say, open it up for everybody, and have logistical support. So when we do come public and say, this is what we're going to do, this is what we're looking for, it doesn't look like it's drawn on the back of a napkin, and we have to have that logistical support. So I agree with Director Caprini's thing to have that support. I know I'll speak for myself. Even at those events, I'll be taking my own notes as well as others, that'll be taking their own notes, as well as having that somebody for there to take their own notes and transcribe them for us, or however they want to do it. I'm not sure. But I think, by our next meeting next month, we should pretty much hit the ground running. I mean, we just don't have the time to, and also too with the holiday seasons coming up, I mean, we kind of have to get this ball moving. So, yeah, so I would support this logistical part, and I would not support having a search firm do all that other stuff. I would just say, let's just do it ourselves. Because we're, like you said, you know, we know our community, we know our parents, we know our communities, our schools in our areas, and some others across the city. So I would just say, let's do the legwork ourselves and hire someone for logistical support.
So our next special superintendent meeting is scheduled for November 1st. We had planned to look at proposals for community engagement. I'm wondering out loud, maybe that's when we look for someone who can facilitate, who can keep the logistics for us. Maybe that's what we're looking for at that time. And then also at that meeting, we can start talking about the places, the parents we want to engage in, with the communities that we want to engage with, the questions that we want to ask. Maybe we can come up with a script by the end of that meeting. I mean, I might be dreaming big, but we need to get started. I mean, that's November 1st. So, everybody have any questions, comments? Director Caprini?
Could you just reiterate what Mr. Cramwell?
Craybill.
Craybill, I'm sorry, I'm so bad with names, names and numbers. Could you please just reiterate what he said about the search firm? I'll tell you what I heard, that it would have been, or maybe that was the legal supports that he suggested. I don't remember if it was one or the other, that to have staff actually looking at applicants' information could, and I'm going to paraphrase, could be problematic, and that's extra work for staff, our HR department to do. So I guess I'm wondering, what exactly did he say about the difference, or the, which is better, which makes more sense, hiring a search firm or having HR do it? Or is it two different things? I just want to leave here understanding what I heard.
I heard him say, do not have your HR department do it.
Okay.
That's what I heard him say. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Director Inns?
Thanks. Excuse me. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to have on the record or whatever my take on this whole process, and I just want to say that I didn't get a chance to thank him, but I appreciate the work that he's doing on our behalf, and assisting us in this process, and looking over, if we look over the document that he sent us with the process in it, I think that's a pretty good framework for us, and it doesn't sound like the board has too many problems with that overall process. I guess the main questions for us, I think, to consider, as I understand them, are whether or not to engage and how much outside help to engage in the community engagement process is sort of a key question for us. How much of that can we realistically do on our own? I did not hear him say that we have to be in charge of that, only that we need to be present for it and engaged in that process and hear what is said. What that process is and how it's laid out, I don't think that we as 9 people here as a board have a lot of capacity to set up like where we're going to go, all that kind of stuff. We can certainly steer that process, but I think that we need a lot of external help setting that up. I'm thinking about the previous process and the fact that we did engage a community engagement person that I thought was highly successful and very helpful in that process as a member of that superintendent search committee as well. And I did not consider that to be like a negative or anything that anyone in our community thought was necessarily distancing the board from that process, but rather it just helped us perform what is our role. So I guess that's, for me, is the kind of the area where I'm not really sure like what we're hearing from him maybe matches up with what we're saying on the board as well. So I think that's an important question for us to consider and to answer. sooner rather than later. I know that for us, a lot of that community engagement in the last search was around the 2 finalists, right? And that was really where they went out into the community. What I'm hearing him say is like, we need to do that sort of in the beginning in establishing the rubric, and what the board had previously created as a rubric in that search needs to be sort of more of a community developed, like what are the things that we're not going to accept from a superintendent, those exclusionary pieces. So that's the big difference that I'm hearing, and that, you know, I think that it would be helpful for us to have as much help as possible, but still not that let that be a barrier between us and the engagement with the community, but rather a facilitation of that. Just because I think, like, you know, like we said, like Director Jordan said, I mean, we have jobs, Director Caprini, you know, it's just hard for us to do that work, you know, and we're not, I mean, we are elected, and it is our job to represent our communities and be engaged with our communities, but as far as the board is concerned in this one particular task, I think support for it, and as much support for it in a way that we still retain oversight, is important.
What I heard AJ say is the council or another group would, well, he said specifically the council would talk to each board member who's important to engage, what are some of the questions, and that they could then come up with, you know, here are the places you say you need to meet, the groups you need to meet with, and they could come up with the questions, you know, that we could then agree on. And so, yeah, but the board doesn't have to do all of that work, but we need to be engaged in who are we going to talk to.
That sounds like a good process to me, right?
Okay.
What you're hearing, what you're reflecting to me, I think. And then, if I recall, that was one thing that was very helpful as a board member, is the data that we got from those groups was very real, and we got to look through the actual feedback that the actual people in those that were representative of those groups provided to us as we took part in the superintendent, you know, finalist process and the interviews. All that stuff was super helpful. So,
Right.
yeah.
I agree.
And I think that you remember as a committee member on the selection committee, and Director Ali as well, like we felt like in that room we had voices from our communities that were there present with us, and that was super helpful. Yeah. So
Director
thank
Ali?
you. That's just my reflections. I want to make sure that it was,
Okay.
this was the time, it seemed like. Yeah. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Director Ali? Are you?
No, I'm fine, madam.
Okay, you're fine, okay. Anybody else? All right. So our next meeting is scheduled for November 1st, 5 PM. Our next our next superintendent search meeting is scheduled for November 1st at 5 PM. Without objection, I'm now going to adjourn this meeting. I'm sure we'll be talking, emailing. So, thank you. Good night, everyone.